We're going to talk about Mexican Americans and Latinos in World War II. The first thing to note about Hispanics in the war is that they made up 2.3 to 4.7% of the American forces. That number did not include the women and men working on the home front in victory gardens as well as in factories. It said about 9,000 Hispanics died protecting America in the war, but statistics are relatively unclear. In this war, Mexican Americans won more awards than any other minority in the United States at the time. They won 7,500 awards. 13 of them were Medals of Honor, which were the most prestigious awards. The man on the left was the first Hispanic man to receive the Medal of Honor, and after him, about 13 other Hispanics won that award. Mexican Americans received discrimination before, after, and during the war. They reported that their drill sergeants were a lot harsher on men of color than they were on white soldiers. When they came back home, they found that jobs were very hard to come by, and they also paid very little. And they also discovered that services were still denied to them because of their race. Mexican American women were also very important on the home front. They worked in victory gardens as well as factories with delicate instrument repair because their hands were more suitable to work with the small screws involved in the process. They also entertained Mexican soldiers when they came to their hometowns by dancing for them. And an example of an important woman was Enriqueta Andazola. She founded the Mexican War Mothers, which was an organization that tended to wounded soldiers in hospitals, sent care packages to GIs, and they also built a statue in downtown Sacramento to honor the dead Hispanic soldiers of the war.
Aside from the home front, Latinos also served in the war as a part of WWII, the Army Nurse Corps, and WAC. They were only a small percentage of the total 150,000 women in the war because of their cultural values. The exact amount of Latinas is not known because of the records of the Latinas and the white women were mixed together during the war. Thousands of Latinos also came to the United States with the Bracero program because of the lack of labor in the United States since the majority of the workforce was serving in the war. After the war, the Latinos both that had worked in the home front and served in the army felt more unified and wanted better treatment after serving with the whites. The GI Bill of Rights was instated in 1944. It created benefits for veterans. These benefits included low-interest loans for businesses, homes, and farms, along with government-paid tuition and unemployment pay for up to a year. The GI Bill was created for all veterans, but it especially helped the Latino population. Because of the GI Bill, Latinos had access to luxuries that many of them couldn't have afforded before the war. These luxuries included the ability to start a business or even go to college. With their newfound knowledge, they were able to get degrees and start new lives. They were also able to start fighting for their right to be equal to whites. Hector Garcia, an Army veteran doctor, founded the American GI Forum in 1948. When he came back from serving in the war, he saw a lot of racism towards Latinos and wanted to help. Over time, the organization branched out from just dealing with veterans' issues to dealing with issues of education and civil rights as well.
The Bracero program was a series of laws and diplomatic agreements between the U.S. and Mexico in order for the U.S. to contract temporary labor from Mexico. The laborers would work in agricultural fields of the United States. They needed this because Americans were going into World War II or other warfare industries, and there was a shortage in the workforce. The Mexican Revolution left the country suffering. The government failed to provide resources to improve peasants' lives, and by the late 30s, the crop fields began to yield insufficient harvests, and Mexicans began to look for other means of work. They usually worked in United States agriculture, sometimes in the railroads. They thinned sugar beets, picked cucumbers and tomatoes, and weeded and picked cotton. They had a significant contribution to the agricultural economy, and that's why the United States were able to feed so many soldiers overseas. Over the course of 22 years, 4 million laborers were contracted for periods of 4 to 6 months. This was an opportunity for braceros because they usually came from impoverished communities. The program provided them with free housing, bathing facilities, food, and then paid them for their work. This was an opportunity to put their agricultural skills to work. It also enabled them to pay for their families back at home. Exploitation, they were made to use small handled hose, which gave them back problems later in life. They were sprayed with DDT upon entering the United States, which is now an outlawed toxic pesticide. And they were forced to sign contracts in English, a language that they didn't understand.
So the Sleepy Lagoon murder has to do with the man Jose Diaz pictured in the middle, and he was murdered on August 2nd of 1942. He is said to be part of a Pachuco, which is any Latin American man in a zoot suit, and he's said to be murdered by the 38th Street Gang members. And this murder is still kind of ongoing because there was not a very thorough investigation. So there were 600 men questioned for the murder of Jose Diaz for the Sleepy Lagoon murder. There were 24 arrested. Their trial was called People v. Zamora, which is the largest trial in Los Angeles history. 17 men were convicted, 12 for murder and 5 for assault, but they were all released in 1944 due to an unfair trial. So the men on the right are in zoot suits, and the men on the left are servicemen, mostly naval men, which during the riots that were in 1943 and started on June 5th, that lasted about 10 days, just beat any men in zoot suits, whether they were Latin American or of other colored race. So during the riots, the servicemen would pull the zoot suiters out of restaurants, movie theaters, cars, anywhere they could be found. They started off by beating 12 to 13-year-old boys, and anybody that tried to defend these boys, they would beat them brutally and then strip them of their zoot suit clothing. So after the riots and everything that happened during the 1940s, zoot suits were seen as just the bad guys' clothing. Even the white men who wore zoot suits, as shown in the bottom left picture, he's getting dirty stares, and to this day it's shown as the symbol of the bad guys, shown by the Batman Joker.